And now, a message from everybody's favorite stagirite. You guessed it, it's Aristotle! Yeah, whoa, Aristotle, oh my gosh, I'm my babies, I love you! Is that not how most crowds react when people announce Aristotle? What's wrong with the world these days? Stagirite is not a dirty word. It means from Stagira, which is Aristotle's hometown. And they say Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year, but really the most wonderful time of the year is any time somebody asks you a question that enables you to embark upon a lengthy, close reading of Aristotle's De Interpretatione. This was probably not how they sold it in the Coca-Cola commercials, but don't believe everything you hear on TV. It's a good day, friends. I have a question from Blaine that is a follow-up to another question that set us off on a thing about prophecy and encryption, and it's been a real journey. But Blaine had such a good follow-up question that I had to get there. You may remember last time on Words, 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 our Friday translation series, I talked about the Rosetta Stone. And that might have seemed like what they called a bottle episode, which is to say an episode that doesn't relate to any of the other stuff in the series, like on a TV show when you just get one character and a little story that doesn't affect anything else. But it was all an elaborate ruse because it was just to prepare the ground. Talking about the Rosetta Stone was just a way in to answering this question by Blaine about the human Rosetta Stone, you might say the Rosetta Soul. Here's Blaine's question. Listening to your episodes on translation, I might summarize translations as getting under the surface of words to the experiences they represent and finding new words that, hopefully, closely correlate to that experience when received by others. I would say that's a pretty good summation of what I've been trying to get across about what translation is. And I would add that that's not, I don't think, what most people think translation is. I think one reason why this series has been so much fun is because it's sort of like if I were a plumber or a mechanic and somebody asked me, or a golfer, and somebody said, hey, do they have like things called 5-irons in golf? And you suddenly realize that the thing that you spend all your time thinking about that seems like a basic tool of the trade is actually something really interesting and profound and fascinating. And that's a gift that you guys give to me when you ask me these questions, is you make me realize how cool the stuff is that I work with every day, namely language and words and foreign languages. Because if you didn't ask me these questions, I might just get kind of used to them. Things that you see every day kind of start to lose their specialness and you start to forget how awesome they actually are. So I'm really grateful to you for these questions because they've helped me to realize that I think most people's picture in their head of what a translation is or what a translator does is look at a word, find the right word in the dictionary or in his knowledge of the language, and then port it over, maybe with some more complexity about grammar and stuff. But there's so much more to it about the nature of language itself and also the impossibility of getting at the inside of the soul, but the reality of the inside of the soul that enables translation and makes it possible. It's something that we only see through the impact. The soul is something we only see through its impact on the outside world. It's like one of these phenomena that we can't observe, but we can only see its effects and hypothesize about it, and yet we have this difference, which is that we experience the soul. So we know it's there, and we see other people acting in ways that indicate they have souls. And C.S. Lewis compares this to getting a package on your doorstep every day and opening it up and finding certain things in it, and then seeing everybody else getting the same package and assuming that the contents are roughly the same. And language is sort of how we tell each other about the contents of that package. So to me, says Blaine, this means that our experiences, minds, consciousness, and eternal souls act as a fundamental Rosetta Stone to language. And I think that by this Blaine probably means that the encounter of the soul with the world and the universal nature of that relationship, that certain things, certain experiences will always take place when a soul meets the world. The fact that that's universal is like a translation tool, a key to all languages that contains the substratum, the material that all languages are working with, and enables us to do translation. I would find it helpful, says Blaine, to have a description or mental picture of what all these are together. You've gone through these topics individually in the past, but many episodes over a long period makes it hard to succinctly summarize and retain. How would you summarize the mind, consciousness, and soul? What is the human Rosetta Stone? I love this question, and not just because it gave me a chance to talk about the Rosetta Stone, although before we get into anything else, I have to mention a book rec and shout out my buddy Brian Keating, who's a cosmologist at UC San Diego and has an awesome podcast called Into the Impossible. And when Brian saw that I had done a Rosetta Stone episode, he tweeted at me this book, Edward Dolnick's The Writing of the Gods. And it is a gold standard example, a perfect picture of how to do exciting scholarly writing that is compelling and elegantly written and just gets at the mystery and the excitement of the thing. And after listening to some of this book, I think I just want to, first of all, recommend it to you. I'll drop the link in the show notes, as always. But to re-stress what a profound and alluring mystery hieroglyphs were before they were interpreted. They were the thing that most fixated, like the holy grail that people who studied the ancient world and who are intoxicated by the sort of aromas of the past, who find it all so alluring. They were always trying to figure out what was behind the hieroglyphs, and because nobody could interpret them, Dolnick points out, that made them seem almost superhuman. People thought maybe not only were they pictograms, but they might be a language of pure ideas, where each symbol stands in for some universal concept, sort of like what Blaine was saying, that if you could have a perfect language that just attached a symbol to a concept. And that is something that people have been searching for forever, and they thought maybe the priests of Egypt, who are famous even in antiquity for retaining the most ancient wisdom, they thought maybe the priests had figured it out, which is why they're called hieroglyphs. Hiero is the Greek root just meaning priest or sacred. And so the glyphs are the carvings or the etchings, and so hieroglyph just means priest carvings, priest etchings. And hieroglyphs drew that kind of mystery to them, attracted that kind of attention like no other writing system did. Dolnick points out that even cuneiform, which was also an extraordinarily important discovery during the 19th century as a writing system for Akkadian and a number of other Near Eastern languages, that unlocked this huge trove of information that nobody had access to up until that point. Cuneiform was sort of dismissed as maybe it was just decorations, probably it was just, if it was writing, it might have just been receipts. And so if people had gone on that way, they would never have found the Enuma Elish and these creation myths that we now can hold up against the Bible and compare. But nobody dismissed, or almost nobody, says Dolnick, dismissed hieroglyphs because they had something about them. The fact that they were connected to Egypt, which is associated throughout history with the most distant and intoxicating of mysteries, and the fact that they were everywhere, all over the walls of every tomb, and yet impossible to decipher. This was just obsessed people. And so I wanted to stress that at the outset, because Blaine's question takes us into an even deeper mystery. And I'm going to kind of riff on his metaphor here, his idea of the human soul as a Rosetta Stone or a key for unlocking all languages. And I would put it maybe a little bit like this. If your soul is the mystery, if your soul is the meaning, the idea, the truth that we know is there, that we know we have, then your body is like the hieroglyphs. It's like the scrawling on the stone that's everywhere. Everything you do, every action you perform in the world, every choice you make, every painting you paint, every word you say or write, all of our outward appearance is like this external symbol of meaning. It just naturally comes across to us as pregnant with meaning, and we know there's something inner in there. There's something inside. And the question then becomes, what and how do we interpret it? And how do we unlock the key to all these different ways that we express ourselves, knowing or trusting as we do that other people are having an inner life sort of like what we are having? And the way to grasp this, or the way to develop a overall theory or picture of the case is one of the central problems in philosophy. It preoccupies philosophers to think about language. And interestingly, language and the study of symbols was a big feature of ancient philosophy. It was, I would say, the core of one major branch. If you think of ancient philosophy as divided into three branches, logic, physics, and ethics, logic is based on logos, that is word in the biggest possible sense. How does meaning, the ineffable or the spiritual or the abstract or the eternal, how does that have any kind of effect upon the physical? And what's the relationship between the hidden mystery in the tomb of Pharaoh and the outward hieroglyphs of our actions, our behavior, our voice, and everything that we do? What route can we rely on to take to go from the inner to the outer? And this was a major part of ancient philosophy. It kind of fell out of fashion for a while. And now, especially since Charles Peirce, somebody I've been reading lately, and Ferdinand Saussure and a number of others, it's become much more of a going concern. But it was like 1/3 of the Hellenistic schools are all about logos. And before that, there's Plato's Cratylus, which is his sort of playful dialogue, trying to figure out how words relate to things, how the words we say connect to the outside world. But it's really Aristotle, and this is why it's always a good day when you get to talk about Aristotle. I think it's really Aristotle who hits on it, who kind of refines what Plato is doing in the Cratylus and a few of the other dialogues to get at it in De Interpretatione. And so I want to use Blaine's question as an opportunity to talk about Aristotle's theory, which is really at the basis. Aristotle and Aquinas are really at the basis of everything I've been saying, that, as Blaine points out, I've been kind of commenting here and there, teasing my theory of translation and building it out, really, in response to your questions. But let's look at it. Let's just bite the bullet and talk about it head on. We'll start with Aristotle, De Interpretatione, on interpretation, right, which is the route from the inner to the outer. It's that wholesale theory of symbols, not just words, but how do we get from the inside to the outside in any case, from the immaterial to the material in any case. And this work is part of what's called the organon, a word that just means tool in Greek. And this is a name that Aristotle's followers, the Peripatetics, developed for 6 of his basic works. So he had 6 books, pretty short, actually, handbooks or treatises on sort of the mechanics of thinking. And they called it the organon, interestingly, because they were arguing against other philosophers, in particular the Stoics, that logic is less the essence, formal logic is less the essence of philosophy than a tool of philosophy, a route to truth. So it's an organon for getting at things, and this is like the operations manual for the car that is philosophy. You know, that little booklet that comes in the glove compartment of your car. That's like the glove compartment of philosophy contains Aristotle's organon, where he lays out a lot of things that we still now think of as basic principles, like how logic works. When you take a formal logic course, you are learning principles and rules, many of which were set down in that form for the first time in Aristotle's organon. And in De Interpretatione, he turns to not only ta onomata, that is names for things, but ta symbola in general. And that's where we get our word symbol, a symbolon in Greek. And I'm going to talk about the etymology of that word in just a second. But first, let me just read to you a portion of what Aristotle has to say in De Interpretatione. And I hate to be that guy. I really do, because, I mean, this whole series is about translation. And I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think translation were possible, and it were possible to do it well and to get a lot of good out of translations. But there are some things, philosophy especially, where you actually do have to read the original. And I know that is like the lamest, most annoying thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway in this case, because translations will not do it justice, especially because you start to see in the original that what we think of as technological or technical philosophical jargon, what we think of as these fancy words that philosophers use in these abstruse ways, are really just the codified versions of ways that philosophers are trying to get at certain concepts that don't have language for them yet. And the example I always use is essence. We think of essence and substance as these technical, philosophical, and sometimes theological terms. But in their etymological form, when you read Plato working out the idea of essence in Greek, it's ousia, which is sort of beingness, and it's related to toon, which is that which is. And if you think of him as trying to grope at that word rather than picking it up out of a bucket of technical tools that he has, you'll get much more of a sense for the nature of these concepts. So that's why I'm going to be working with the Greek here, obviously translating and telling you about what it says in English, but I'm going to just start here right at the beginning of De Interpretatione. This is page 16a, if you want to look it up. And he says, so then, estimen ta in ta te phone, the things of the voice, the things that are spoken, are symbols of the things, the pathemata, that is the inward experiences or inner states of the soul, in the soul. Ta en te phone are symbola of ta pathemata in te psyche. So words, things that we say with our voice, and the whole study of vocal expression, ta en te phone, words, are symbols of inner states of the soul. Now, to me, this is like, sometimes online you say, I spent all this time writing a book about something, and then so-and-so just tweeted it out, as a way of saying he really just got right down to the heart of it. To me, Aristotle just tweeted it out. This is so good because it adds something to what Plato was doing. Plato was trying to figure out the relationship between words and the things that they describe. But Aristotle is saying, no, there's a middle step here that you're missing that can help explain why words don't do what we kind of want them to do in the Cratylus. So in the Cratylus, he's always trying to figure out some direct linkage, some route, straight from the essence of the thing to the shape or the nature of the word. And he's having trouble, he's puzzling over it, because there are different languages. And even if you take just Greek, there are different things that different sounds are used for. And Aristotle is saying that's because the sounds are symbola, are symbols of inner states of the soul. And they stand in for the pathemata, which is a word that just means like things that happen to the soul. In Greek philosophy, we have these two concepts, poiein and paskein, to do and to have done to you. And this is in any action. There's an agent and there's an object of the action, or there's somebody who receives a patient of the action. That's a sort of old-timey way of saying it, but the one who undergoes or suffers the change or the action. And the pathema of the soul is the state that arises in the soul when it is affected by something. Through perception, by seeing things. When I see a chair, my soul is affected by it. That's a pathema in te psyche, an experience or a state that arises in the soul. And when I hear a voice, that's also a pathema. When I learn of the passing of a loved one, that too could be a pathema. Gaining new knowledge is all broadly construed in the category of aesthesis, which is a kind of paskein, a kind of perception, which is a kind of experiencing in the soul. So that's Aristotle's first point. Why does this matter? Well, the next thing that he says is, hos per ude grammata passita auta. Just as the letters, that is the forms of the words that we use, are not all the same, by which he means different people speak different languages, right? Greeky people speak the Greeky tongue, Greeky words, and Spanishy people speak the Spanishy words, and everybody sounds kind of funny, and Tower Babel happened, and we all have different sounds that we apply to these pathemata. And the phoni are not the same. Therefore, the grammar, the letters are not the same. So the words, the voice is not the same everywhere and always. Hon mentoi tauta se mea proton, but the original things of which they are signs, these things are the same, and they are the pathemata tes psyches. So the language is not the same everywhere because it doesn't arise directly out of the things themselves, which are the same everywhere. But the states of the soul that we have when we experience things, those are universal. Those are sort of basically the same wherever we are. If I see a chair and then a person from Bangladesh walks in here and sees a chair, we have some basic faith that even if there are differences around the edges, we are both seeing an object and having an analogous pathema in the soul. And so this preserves the universal nature of human experience without trying to figure out some way in which words have to be the same when they're clearly not. And saying that something is always the same is sort of another way of saying it's by nature, that these pathemata, these inner experiences of the soul, arise by nature everywhere and always. So they'll always be the same. And saying that the words we apply to them, those experiences, are not everywhere the same, is sort of like saying they are by convention, nomo. So Aristotle's saying basically, the sounds of language are conventional, but the referent of language, the things that we describe, are not conventional. They are a natural thing that arises in us at the point of contact between us and the world. And this is why the names are not the onomata, or ta and te phone, the things that we say, the words that we pronounce, are not the homoiomata of the things. And a homoioma in Greek is like a likeness, a similarity. So our words don't look or sound like the things that they are. And the word metal is not hard or tangible, it's a sound. But the pathemata psyches, the experiences of the soul, are the inward states of our experience, are homoiomata of the things outside of us. So inside of us, in the soul, there arises a likeness of the outside world. The soul, in this sense, is a kind of mirror that takes in the image, or the metaphor that the ancients loved is the soul is like a ball of wax that takes in the shape of something that's pressed in. So when I look at that chair, the shape of it gets pressed into my soul like a ball of wax, and there's a likeness in me. And the word that I apply by free choice of the will may or may not look anything or sound anything like the likeness inside of me, but I'm giving it to you as a symbolon, as a symbol of the thing inside of me. So, what's a symbol? It's from two Greek words, sym, with, together, and balein, to throw. A symbol is just two things, or something that throws two things together. It's like a little box or a dish into which you drop two things. And what Aristotle is saying is that the soul is basically one such bucket, one dish, where the pathema, the experience, is kind of yoked together, smashed together with the outside thing. So the thing that is the chair gets yoked in the soul through a process of symbolism or symbolization that is throwing together with the inward experience that I have. And this happens all the time. You can't stop it from happening any more than you can stop your toenails from growing. It's natural. It is by nature, and part of the nature of the chair and the nature of the soul, that when I see the chair, there arises within me a pathema, which is what makes the pathema a symbol, but also a likeness. It operates by likeness, and it happens by nature, and it is always and everywhere going to happen. The word is also a symbol. That is to say, it's something that we smash together with the pathema. So we take this pathema, this experience inside of us, that is a symbol of something, and then we smash it together with something else to make a new symbol. And the thing we smash together is a sound, or Aristotle says we can also use written words as symbols of the sounds, which in turn are symbols of the inner experiences. And that doesn't always happen. So I see the chair, I might say, there's a chair over there, which is a symbol that I have attached, thrown together with the inner experience that I have had. But I might not. I might just have the inner experience. I can't help myself from having the inner experience. That's not something I can control. It's not arbitrary, and therefore it is a real, we might say, an objective feature of the world, although that's kind of misleading because it is subjective within me, but I can't stop myself from having that experience. It arises naturally within me. And Aristotle is proposing, and I am proposing, that this is actually a scientific, if you want to call it that, reality of the world. And because it's subjective, we don't think of it all the time as something that is a hard and fast, hard-coded part of reality. But it is. That's exactly what it is. It happens everywhere. We can't stop it from happening any more than we can stop stones from falling. And therefore, it is part of the nature of the chair or the cat or the table or the piano to have within it the potential, Aristotle would call it the dunamis, the potential to affect my soul in this way. It doesn't have what Aristotle would call the enargeia, that is the or rather the energeia, the energy, the activity of affecting me, until I see it. So let's say the piano's just sitting in the next room, nobody's playing it, I'm not having any perception of it. Says Aristotle, the piano still has the potential to produce a pathema, to produce it has the conditions and the nature, the kind of thing that would, if I heard it, produce a particular experience in me, or if I saw it, it would produce a particular experience in me. So that is a feature of it, but it only has the activity, the potential only becomes active when I encounter it. And so you might say that the piano is inherently symbolic. It has a symbol built in, or the potential for a symbol built into its nature, but it needs to be smashed together with the soul in order to have to actually be symbolized, for the potential symbol to be realized. What does this mean? It means reality is symbolic. And when we make language, we are constructing symbols. That is, we're throwing together the experience of our world and of the soul with these signs, with hieroglyphs, with letters, with grunts, with gestures, whatever. And we're doing it by convention, that is, by our free choice, and we can arbitrarily choose to do it differently. But it would be wrong and useless for us to do it in a way that doesn't correspond to the objective symbol, to the real symbol that is inherent in the thing, because the whole point of our doing symbols is to communicate to one another the symbol that is already going on. A Christian would say that what this tells us is, in the beginning was the Word, that symbolism and language and logos in the deepest, most bone-deep way is built into the fabric of existence, is part of the world. So if I think, for example, of the impact of a sound wave on my eardrums, the sound wave isn't itself a sound. It's not the same thing as the quality of the say the bird song that I hear. It only has that potential, but the potential is part of it, is a real feature of it in the world, and the world is full of real symbolic features. Language is a symbolic structure that we build in order to share that inward experience. And so the soul is a Rosetta Stone in the sense that it is the container within which the symbolic nature of the world moves from potential to actual. The world is thrumming with possible symbols and with possible realities that are genuinely in the world, that are symbolic, but they require a receptacle or a recipient to take their shape. And once they take shape in the soul, become actual in the soul and have what Aristotle would call energeia, once they take that shape, then nature has done all that it can. We typically think that nature stops where mechanical, physical motion stops, but that's not quite true. Nature stops where the automatic symbols stop. The minute you've perceived something, that's as far as nature can go in attaining reality. And our job then is to multiply and make manifold that reality by sharing it with one another and exponentially increasing the sum total of God's creation. And we do that with language. That's the point of language. It's a man-made symbol to build off of and spiral out of the God-made symbols that are everywhere in the world. So, what does this mean? It means that the next time your buddy asks you that dumb question that everybody asks in the dorm room, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, does it make a sound? You have an actual answer because Aristotle just tweeted it out thousands of years ago. And the answer goes something like this. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody is there to hear it, it creates the conditions for sound. It creates the material realities that have potential symbolism in them, that have part of their reality is the potential for them to be symbolic. But without the person, they do not actually make a sound because a sound is the actual symbol. When we talk about sound, what we mean is not the conditions that create the possibility of sound, but the real life thing in the wild of a person actually hearing. And it takes a soul to receive that symbol, which comes in nature and arrives at last at its final destination point, which is you. And then you bring it on from there. And this is how we become co-creators with God, as we start to talk to one another, we start to create, we start to imagine, and we do all these things using language. But before we speak a word, there is already the form of language within us, because we are, in some sense, symbolic beings in a symbolic world, encountering symbols. Now, there's a small footnote to the tree falling in the forest, which is, if God hears it, is that a sound? And the answer to that is, I does not know. A lot of people will try to construct elaborate philosophical arguments about it. You can read Bishop Barclay if you want to read somebody who really thinks that God is holding the reality of all ideas and probably aesthetic experiences too in his mind at all times. And certainly God knows about the potential for it, but the specific nature of the sound itself is, I think, a human phenomenon. That is, sound, when we speak of it, is just how we describe that qualitative experience of being there and receiving the pathema ente psyche, the experience, the inward state that arises in the soul. This is such a profound topic that I'm going to come back to it next week, but I hope, Blaine, that has basically answered in outline your question. Aristotle explains to us, I think, how the soul functions as a kind of clearinghouse or a holding space for all of the symbolism, that is the throwing together, the meaning that is built into nature and follows on in the logical chain from atoms on up to trees falling in forests, and ultimately reaches its right goal in us. And we do rightly when we apply our symbols in the outward world and write our hieroglyphs in ways that can be interpreted once we make the key assumption that other people are also, in the image of God, recipients of the symbols. All right, I'm going to put a pin in this for a second, and then we're going to come back to it next week for more truth, beauty, and the stuff that matters.